So in today's Retrobat setup guide, we're taking a look at the awesome Sharp X1. So really this was more of a microcomputer which was popular in Japan from 1982 to 1988, and just like microcomputers, most microcomputers from that era, the X1 was actually based on the Z80 Zilog processor, just like most computers, like I say. So it's a little bit of a tricky, fiddly system to configure in Retrobat. But in this setup guide, I'm going to be showing you how to map out your controller to respond to your keyboard's controller settings. That's some games for X1 required. I'm also going to be showing you video settings and just generally showing you what the X1 system has to offer. So check this one out. Okay, before I start today's setup guide for Retrobat users out there on the Sharp X1, just make sure to subscribe and like, and also hit notifications so you don't miss upcoming Retrobat and other emulation content that I cover here on my channel, Just Jamie. So we're looking at the Sharp X1 today, and of course this is a microcomputer complete with tape drive. As we can see, we had different variations of the Sharp X1, a little bit like the 3DO consoles of the early 90s. This is an 8-bit computer and it's going to be playing some 8-bit games. So let's just start with, this is a little bit fiddly to configure, but once we do configure it, it's pretty fun. Cross between, I suppose, something like Commodore 64 and Sega Master System-ish. So what we're going to do first then, like I always do, is just go to Retrobat shortcut, open file location, and we're going to head up to BatGUI. Now BatGUI, if you're new to Retrobat, is a very important tool. It tells us a lot of things. If we go to System List, and what we're going to do is just go to System and just drop this down, and we're going to find X1. Let me just remind you as well, if you don't see any of this, what I'm doing right now, you haven't installed Retrobat correctly, and you're going to need to follow my fully comprehensive guide to getting you up and running with that. So what we can see here is that X1 games in Retrobat are going to be running through Retroarch core, which is X1, and the extensions for it, the game extensions, need to end with say .dx1, .zip, .2d, and there's many different extensions for X1 through Retrobat and Retroarch. So we know which type of file extensions we need now, and what we're going to do next then is just to take a look at the game files that I've got. So in my games folder just here, most of my games are in .2d file extension, and I've got a couple in .da8, and these work fine, they've been tested. So what I'm going to do is go back into my Retrobat folder and go into ROMs, and from here, if I just scroll down, I'm going to come across X1. It's not going to be Sharp X1, just X1, and here it is. And if you're new to my channel, or you've been here for a while, I also covered the X68000 a little while back, so check that one out. That's also a very cool system. So X1, and I'm going to just drag and drop my X1 games into that ROMs X1 folder. Now with the X1, we do need a couple of BIOS files, so what we're going to do is come out of ROMs, and we're going to go into the BIOS folder. And the BIOS files we need are iplrom.x1 and lplrom.x1t, and this is all we need to get X1 games working in Retroarch and Retrobat. So that's that. Now the next thing I need to talk about is controlling games. So a lot of them, what I tested for X1, work fine, and they automatically detect my controller, which is a Google Stadia. There is a few games which need to be used from keyboards. So the problem is that the fire button or action button on X1 games is the space bar. Now, if you press the space bar whilst you're in the game before in Retrobat, your space bar also acts as a fast forward key. So whilst you're in an X1 game and you're firing, you're also going to notice that it's interfering with that fast forward button. So what we're going to do is change that space bar button function from fast forwarding. And to do this, what we're going to do, in the Retrobat directory, we're going to go to emulators. And from emulators, we're going to go down to the Retroarch folder. And from here, we're going to just scroll down until we find retroarch.config. If you open this up with a notepad, and once this is opened with a notepad, you're going to need to scroll down until we find input toggle fast forward. And as we can see, this one is currently mapped as the spacebar, and that's the issue. You press the spacebar and it's interfering with the action button for X1 games. So what we're going to do with this is just backspace, space, and just use a button that you're not using too often. So in my case, I'm going to just type in Q, and that's going to act as our button to fast forward games from now on. Just make sure you go to File, Save, and you can now close down. So that's everything set up from this part. So what we're going to do then is go into Retrobat. Okay, so once we're in Retrobat, we can now see X1, 11 games. So if we go inside of here, let's just get some artwork. So main menu, scraper, and screen scraper, and just configure how you want your games to download their art. So I'm going to try these, what I've just put in place, and let's go to scrape now. So no games fit that criteria. So in that case, let's just try something else. And there we go. So games are now scraping. And while this is scraping, what we're going to do is take a look at assigning your keyboard keys to your controller. Like I say, most games from what I've tested automatically work fine with your controller, but there is particular games such as Galaga and Galaxian which only work with a keyboard. So of course most of you don't want to be messing around with no keyboards. So what we're going to do is go to View Options, Advanced System Options, and if we go right to the bottom, Edit Pad to Key Profile. Now I've already assigned these, so most games on the X1 tends to use the numeric keypad on your keyboard. So say 4 equals left, 6 equals right, 8 equals upwards, and 2 equals downwards. And of course, we also got the space bar, which is acting as the fire button. So what we're going to do is, like say, and as you can see, I've already done this. We're going to go to D-pad up and literally just press on 8 on that numeric keypad on the virtual keyboard you can see. And that's going to assign your D-pad up as that key on your keyboard. And D-pad down, so 2, D-pad left 4, D-pad right 6. Now for action button, what I've done is just scroll down and I'm using my right trigger as that action button. So I'm going to just press on space, and then once we've done that, we can go down to save and back. Now the scraping process has now been finished, so I'm going to go to main menu, game settings, update game list, and yes. And as we can see, everything's fine. So what we're going to do first then is actually test out that mapping of the controller and keypad, which I've just done. So one of these is Galaga. Now, if I press Q on my keyboard, because I went into that config and then opened up with Notepad, it's now assigned to the Q rather than the spacebar. And I'm pressing my fire button on my controller to use the fire button on the game. And there we go, it's working absolutely perfectly with my controller. So a game which doesn't require mapping is Mappy. It's a very fun game, that Mappy. So let's look at some video settings. So controllers configured from the keyboards, and now everything's working on the controller on my Google Stadia controller. So advanced system options, and normally you'll see emulators at the top, but as we've already established, it's only Retroarch X1 Core which is going to be supporting this, and we don't see emulator at the top, but we got our usual suspects here for shader sets, and we got decorations. Now, I'm always going to say this, but if we go to shader set first, I'm going to use curvature, and I'm going to go to decorations, and I'm going to turn off the default unglazed decoration and go to none. Game aspect ratio, these games are designed for 4:3. If you put them to something like 16:9, it's going to be very much stretched. But if we use full, that should be fine. So let's just test out the game with the curvature shader set, decorations off, and game aspect ratio turned to full. So if I come back out, and just remember, whichever button you assign as your fast forward key, we can still use that. There we go. Now, in some cases, on some games, we're going to have a couple of discs to use. So, for example, we're going to open up Super Ladle. Now, normally, if you've got your games together, it's going to ask for, say, Game Disc 1, which is the second disc. If I just press normal on this, or Game Start, it should automatically detect it. Now, say for example, it doesn't automatically detect your second disc. Whilst you're in your game, all you need to do is go to the Retroarch menu, and if you go to disc control, you can then insert your next disc into that game, so you can then load from disc 2. And briefly, I'm going to just show you some more games so you get a good feel for the Sharp X1, and we're going to start off with Super Mario Bros. Special. So that's Super Mario Bros. Special. There's nothing special at all. The frame rate in that is diabolical. And yes, this was sold commercially back in the day. So kids nowadays, they moan about 30 FPS. Check this sucker out. This is around 5 FPS. So next up, we got Xvius. And I'm going to just go to Advanced System Options again and just put everything back to how it was. And let's just remind ourselves that under visual rendering, we can smooth games out so they're not so pixelated. We've also got video filters to apply, such as scan lines and upscaling options. Smooth games is normally set to auto, which is picking up on already. Internal resolution, we can pop this onto high, and that's going to give us a bit more definition. Not that we need it for these old 8-bit games. So let's go back into Xvius. that's it for today's Retrobat and Sharp X1 setup guide. As we can see, some classic 8-bit gaming there with very extraordinary frame rates, especially that Super Mario Bros. Special game. Like I said, I'm not sure why they call that special at all, because it because it really wasn't at all. And yes, I did check out the actual original frame rates for that game. So by no means is that a bad game copy I've got, file I've got. That's actually how that game ran. Pretty shocking stuff. So anyways, if you're new to my channel, hit notifications, subscribe and like so you don't miss upcoming Retrobat and various other emulation content that I upload on my channel every day. Also join me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and TikTok. But until next time, stay retro.